Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. It's becoming extremely difficult to continue broadcasting because of the absurdity of all of the madness happening around us. We live in the absolute worst timeline imaginable. We live in a timeline where we are experiencing both a full-blown global pandemic. We are experiencing a full-blown economic depression. We have gone through somewhat of a minor revolution, and all of these things are happening at the same time. And the leadership of this country is as ignorant can be. In fact, the ignorance is weaponized. It is a strategic ignorance. It is a level of absurdity that it is difficult for most people to grasp, to grab hold of, to find a way to actually navigate around this and out of this. It's difficult to move forward when we are inundated with such a level of stupidity. And that is why I call what Donald Trump is doing to this country weaponized ignorance. He understands that our system is so fragile. It is barely surviving a man who has zero regard for institutions, a man who has zero regard for norms, a man who has zero regard for the Constitution, in fact. But he adds on top of that a level of stupidity that is embraced by his supporters because we are at a stage in decline where people embrace the ignorance. As long as I've discussed this before, but I just have to keep coming back to this. What's happening around us, and I'll get to the meat of it. I'll tell you why I feel this way today in a minute. I just have to get this off my chest. Is that okay? All right. We are at a level of ignorance. We are at a level of stupidity in this country that George Orwell could not even have predicted. Okay. Right. We always use 1984 as a benchmark to compare what is actually happening in the world around us. But I'm afraid that 1984 is woefully insufficient in describing the fact that the people want the propaganda. The people want the lies. They don't just want it, they demand it. And Donald Trump knows this. We are in the middle of a full-blown pandemic, and yet the president of the United States not only said it in his speech Saturday night, but he has doubled down on his ignorance today via Twitter. And I know it is all intentional. I know that it is strategic. It is weaponized ignorance. But it is the state of America. It is the state that we are in that something as ignorant as this could actually succeed. That is the absurdity of the American empire. We are inundated with people so desperate to win social media arguments that they are willing to embrace any lie, any level of stupidity, any level of ignorance, so long as it protects their ability to own each other, to own the libs, to own the conservatives. I have two examples today that they are not equivalent. I just want to be sure that as I give the examples, they are not equivalent. The first comes from the president of the United States. The president who on Saturday night said this about testing and COVID-19.
Here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test. We got tests that people don't know what's going on.
Now, that's the president of the United States. After 120 some odd thousand people have died as a result of COVID-19, many of those deaths could have been prevented if we had sufficient testing early on and quarantining early on. Testing is not enough. Knowing that you have it is not enough. Being quarantined is what's necessary to protect everyone else in your household. So if we had testing early on, some of those 128,000 Americans who have died in the last 3-4 months would still be alive. But here the president of the United States is declaring that we should slow down on testing. Well, that didn't play well with the handful of people in this country who still operate in good faith and are genuinely concerned about this global pandemic taking more lives. And so the press secretary for the president of the United States, Kelly McEnany, whatever the hell her name is, she came out and said that, oh, it was just a joke.
When he said Saturday that he told his people to slow it down, what did he mean by that?
The president was trying to expose what the media oftentimes does is they ignore the fact that the United States has more cases because we have more testing. We are leading the world in testing, and he was pointing that out, that it's a fact that the media readily ignores.
What he's saying that he told his people to slow down testing is not true?
It was a comment that he made in jest. It's a comment that he made in passing, specifically with regard to the media coverage and pointing out the fact that the media never acknowledges that we have more cases because when you test more people, you find more cases.
My God. Even in her attempt to walk it back, she ended up doubling down on the same level of stupidity. Does it have to be said? Do I actually have to say it? We do not have more cases because of more testing. We are simply identifying the number of cases that we have. There are even more cases that have not been found because we don't have complete and total universal testing. This is not spreading because of testing. This is the underlying ignorance that is being forwarded both by the press secretary and the president of the United States. And the press secretary, trying to protect the president from his own ignorance, is still doubling down on his ignorance because they feel like it is more important for them to win the political fight than it is to save lives. The president of the United States is more determined to win political fights than he is saving lives. That is the reality of our moment. That is the absurdity of our moment. Because for some reason, no, this goes right. It's not just some reason. It literally goes back to the weaponized ignorance. It goes back to the disingenuousness and the bad faith of all of these people engaging in this political arena. All Donald Trump has to do is give his supporters a lifeline, no matter how stupid that lifeline is, so long as he gives them something to cling to. They will forward that talking point no matter how absurd, no matter how ridiculous, and no matter how detrimental to their own safety and health. That is the absurdity of this moment. But I got to finish this. I got to finish the whole picture because it wasn't enough. The press secretary tried to save him from himself, and Donald Trump came out this morning doubling down, tripling down. In fact, this is what he said. Via Twitter, the president said, quote, cases are going up in the U.S. because we are testing far more than any other country and ever expanding. With smaller testing, we would show fewer cases. Folks, the level of stupidity that is occupying the White House right now, it is only there. This is not just a judgment against Donald Trump. It's there and supported by the ignorance of so many people around this country. This man has 104,000 likes, 41,000 retweets in the last 4 hours since he posted this. This is not just ignorance from Donald Trump. It is weaponized ignorance to give his supporters, his base, a lifeline, a life preserver. So long as he throws them anything, they will cling to it and they will use it and circulate it as if it is fact. No, truth be damned. Common sense be damned. Just sheer, pure, simple observation be damned. And the thing that we always quote from 1984 is the line about the party asking you to look at 2 + 2 and rejecting the fact that 2 + 2 = 4 and saying that it equals 5. But that was a command from the party in 1984. This is actually a command from the people. If Donald Trump if he did not give the people the lies, if he didn't give them the stupidity, the ignorance, the propaganda, if he didn't give it to them, they would not support him and they would go find somebody else who would. And Donald Trump knows that, and that's why he doubles down and triples down. Here he is rejecting the idea that he was just joking because he doesn't care about saving face. He doesn't care about looking stupid. He doesn't care about looking ignorant. All he cares about is that he provides for his base what they need to stay in a constant state of political hyperpartisan frenzy.
I don't kid. Let me just tell you, let me make it clear. We have got the greatest testing program anywhere in the world. We test better than anybody in the world. Our tests are the best in the world, and we have the most of them. By having more tests, we find more cases. We did 25 million tests. Think of that, 25 million. If you look at other countries, they did 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, big countries. We did 25 million, way more by double, triple, quadruple any other country. Therefore, we test, we're going to have more cases. By having more cases, it sounds bad, but actually what it is we're finding people. Many of those people aren't sick or very little. You know, they may be young people. But what's happened is because of all of the cases that we find, we have a very low mortality rate, just about the best in the world. So that's the advantage to the testing, along with other things. But just remember this, the reason we have more cases than other countries is because our testing is so much.
This is the president of the United States. It's easy to dismiss this. There is a propensity in progressive circles to dismiss this as schadenfreude. But you can't dismiss this because this behavior pattern is contributing to the spread and to death, to the spread of COVID-19 and to the death rate. And if you're Black and Latino, Latinx, you are more likely to die of this, 9 times more likely to die of this if you're Black than your white counterparts. So the fact that the president of the United States is engaging in a level of weaponized ignorance that is meant specifically to help him win a political battle at the expense of lives, that is treacherous. And that is the timeline that we live in. If you ask me what I care about, it's hard to care about anything when you're so inundated with disingenuousness and bad faith arguments and a level of weaponized ignorance that has put our country on a path to destruction. It's hard. It's hard to actually care. Now, what I'm getting ready to play for you now pales. I want to be sure it pales in comparison to what the president of the United States is doing. I want to state that again because I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm getting ready to play and what I'm getting ready to discuss as drawing a false equivalence between the treacherously dangerous technique of the president of the United States, weaponizing ignorance, and the political machinations of the Democratic Party. They're not equivalent, but they're both extremely infuriating for different reasons. Here's a clip of Maggie Haberman, who I'm not a fan of, by the way. She's from the New York Times. I'm not a fan of hers. I'm not playing this to defend her, but I need you to see how ignorance is weaponized and how bad faith, disingenuousness is weaponized all around us. I can't call it out from the president and not call it out from people who are ostensibly on our side. Because if I don't call it out from people who are ostensibly on our side, then they will use that against us like they have done so many times before. So here's a clip of Maggie Haberman giving a critique of Joe Biden, which you judge for yourself whether or not you think what you think of this. I'm not going to set it up at all. You listen to this and you tell me what you think of this.
I don't know any Democrats, honestly, Anderson, who think this is going to be an easy election. I think David can possibly speak to that more than I can, but I certainly don't know any who think this is going to be easy, in part because a lot of people are very scarred by thinking that 2016 was going to be easy. And by people, I mean Democrats were scarred by thinking that Hillary Clinton was naturally going to defeat Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton thought that, her top advisors all thought that, and they were sort of appalled and couldn't allow for the fact that he was doing as well as he was, and reality overtook them. And so I think that there are Democrats who are concerned that that is what will happen again. Look, as much trouble as Donald Trump is in politically right now, a lot of it of his own making, but certainly not all of it, Joe Biden is still a very flawed candidate. He is running a flawed campaign so far. There are still 4 months left. They have to have what are supposed to be 3 general election debates. 4.5 months ago, we were not talking about the coronavirus the way we are talking right now. So a lot can happen. And I do think it is important to remember that at the end of the day, elections are still binary. And people, if they decide to vote, unless they decide to write someone in, are going to make a choice between these 2 men. And there are going to be a lot of people who, even if they are unhappy with Donald Trump right now, there will be people who still decide to vote for him in the end. It is a real mistake for anybody to start calling the election today based on, and it's important to not overplay what happened over the weekend, which was ultimately a rally in a red state. They made it a big deal, but on its own, it's not that big a deal.
It did. Okay. What did you think? Did you think that was some type of good advice? Or did you think it was an all-out attack, a disingenuous, bad faith attack against Joe Biden? Because as I awoke to Twitter this morning and I saw Maggie Haberman trending, I'm like, oh my gosh, she must have said something else stupid. Because, if I'm not mistaken, she's the one who laughed at the idea that Donald Trump would be the nominee. Hang on, let me make sure of that.
All I want to say is that anybody from the Democratic side of the fence who thinks that, who's terrified of the possibility of President Trump, better vote, better get active, better get involved, because this man has got some momentum, and we better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket.
Next, I know you don't believe that, but
Bad
I want to
voice.
go on.
Right.
Sorry to laugh.
Sorry to laugh.
George, we had Jesse Ventura in Minnesota win the governorship. Nobody thought he was going to win. I'm telling you, stranger things have happened.
Well,
That's a good. That's a clip from George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week. The first voice that you heard, the voice of reason, was Keith Ellison. The man that you heard that was like, you can't really mean that. That was George Stephanopoulos. He was dead wrong. And then you had Maggie Haberman. I'm sorry to laugh at you. So it's not, when I saw her trending, I'm like, okay, she said something that was probably just as stupid, but no. She gave a reasoned, measured critique that tells me that somehow or another, at least in terms of Donald Trump's capacity to win again, she learned her lesson from that clip. Now, why am I sharing this with you? Well, the Democrats and Democratic apparatchiks and part of the people in the establishment, they made her trend because they saw it as an attack against Joe Biden. They interpreted her words as a bad faith attack against Joe Biden versus here is some good sound advice that you should be listening to because there is a possibility that Donald Trump could still win this. And that is a terrifying notion. And why this is so important to me, enough to put it in today's episode, is because if Joe Biden is surrounded by morons who insulate him and insulate their operation from rational, reasonable critiques, then they are going to lose to Donald Trump. And I don't think that we can survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. Hell, I barely think that we're going to survive until January 21st when he is ushered out of office. So here's the thing. Donald Trump has the capacity of weaponizing ignorance and giving his people a lifeline to cling to so that they can have something to argue about on the internet. And they could still rally behind the president of the United States. It has not and does not work the same for our side of the equation. Whether you consider yourself to be a Democrat, a leftist, a progressive, a socialist, whatever the case may be, we always cut to the core of an argument and decide whether or not that argument is in good faith or bad faith, or at least we attempt to. And so what they are asking us to do is to turn a blind eye to the shortcomings of this candidacy because he is a flawed. Joe Biden is a flawed candidate. You have to hide him. Let's keep it real. Joe Biden is running a flawed campaign. All the money they raise, and they don't even have state directors in every state at this point. They're running a flawed campaign. And if you cannot hear that without rejecting the evidence, without rejecting the truth, then you are doing 2 things. 1, you're doing what I hate the most, which is operating in bad faith. But then 2, you are putting us at risk of having Donald Trump have a second term. Because we are not just going to go along with whatever ignorance that you give us. We reject it. We reject it. Here's the fundamental difference of what's happening around us. Yeah, you do have some Democrats who receive it and embrace it, and that's fine. But you don't have enough. You do not have enough blind faith Democrats who are just going to go along with whatever the party says do. Versus on the other side, the Republican base is so rabid that if Donald Trump ever stops feeding them the disingenuousness and the bad faith arguments, that they would sacrifice him and put somebody else in power who will. They're two fundamentally different paradigms at play, and Democrats better damn well understand that they cannot play these games of weaponized ignorance with us, because we call them on their bullshit and we expect better. And the danger here is that they are rejecting some pretty decent advice that could help them win, all because they refuse to acknowledge that they have a flawed candidate. But I'm sorry, Joe Biden is not Jesus the Christ. I'm sorry if you have to take a few seconds to actually consider the fact that you picked one of the worst candidates possible. But because Donald Trump is so bad, your candidate, who was the worst pick possible, should win. He has a fighting chance to win, but not if you run a flawed campaign and don't have senior staff in every single state. We are surrounded by stupidity, and it is weaponized ignorance, and it's getting people killed in one case, and it's going to let Donald Trump win in the second case. Another man has been found hanging. Another black man has been found hanging from a tree in Huntington, Long Island, yesterday morning. This makes 6 or 7 black men, people of color. I think there was one Latinx man, and the rest have been black, who have been found hanging from trees. And I'm sorry, at this point, you cannot take this. Of course, the police have ruled this as a suicide. But it's difficult to look at this. You cannot look at this and tell me that there is nothing suspicious going on, that this is something that should not be investigated as a hate crime. Because as we've talked about it, I've talked about it so many times, but I have to keep saying it because people keep hanging from trees. Black men in particular keep ending up hanging from trees. So forgive me if I have to repeat this over and over again. Black men may very well kill themselves. Yes, they do. We do. We have mental health issues. We have problems with depression. That happens. But we ain't hanging ourselves from trees. You think it's more a person who is actually contemplating suicide is trying to make a political statement at the same time? Is it possible? Yes. Once, possibly. Twice, possibly. 3 times? Okay, something's up. 4 times? You gotta be kidding me. 5 times? 6 times? 7 times? And yet the federal government is just like, I don't know. State government, the police officers are ruling it instantly as they're immediately ruling it as suicides. When we know for a fact that white terror in this country is a significant threat, not only to black life, not only to police lives, but lives in general. The number one threat, terroristic threat in this country, comes from white men, white conservative men. White right-wing extremist conservative men is the prevailing threat, terroristic threat in this country. And here we are at 7 quote-unquote suicides, hanging, lynchings. And I've yet to hear of a federal investigation to look at the connecting threads between all of them. And I guess why would I expect something like that from a president of the United States, from a Justice Department that is more committed to consolidating power for the president of the United States than they would ever be committed to protecting the lives of black people in this country? So anyway, this guy, Sean King, tweeted out yesterday something to the effect that white Jesus needs to come down. I'm blocked on his timeline, so I can't really read it. But that led to an interesting conversation that really is in my wheelhouse. People took to Twitter and really are concerned with the idea of churches being under attack and Christianity being under attack because of that guy's tweet. And this is what Jenna Ellis, whoever she is, Esquire, so I guess she's an attorney. She's a senior advisor to Donald Trump's team. This is what she tweeted out, starting a huge conversation online. She said, "I'm going on record now. If they try to cancel Christianity, if they try to force me to apologize or recant my faith, I will not bend, I will not waver, I will not break. On Christ, the solid rock I stand." That's a hymn. That's one of my favorite hymns, by the way. And I'm proud to be an American. Oh, look how she slid that imperialism in there. Just, that nationalism and Christianity. When fascism comes to the United States, it's going to be wrapped in a flag and a cross. I know I said it wrong, but you get the picture. But I do like that hymn. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. These people don't love Jesus. This is the point. They do not love Jesus. They only love him to the extent that they can weaponize him for their political purposes. They only love Jesus to the extent that they can weaponize him to be a bludgeoning tool against ideologies that they disagree with, against lifestyles that they disagree with, against any group of people who do not conform to this white male Christian power structure. That is the extent of their love for Jesus. You know how I know? Because what they really worship is capitalism. If they honestly obeyed the teachings of Christ, then they would not be the unadulterated capitalists that they are. And in fact, if Jesus was here right now, preaching and teaching the same things that he preached and taught back when he was here, they would be in the group of people who yelled to crucify him. Without question, Jesus is nothing more than a political tool for white conservatives to maintain power, economic and political power, period. That notwithstanding, it's still ridiculous it is ridiculous to attack people's religious houses of worship. That's ridiculous. Like, the idea is absurd on its face. Now, if the people inside of those churches want to tear down the images of white supremacy in their churches, then by all means, that's their political and religious right to do so. But there should not be anybody from outside. Can you imagine how we would behave, how utterly infuriated we would be if everyone was going into mosques or synagogues to tear down images that we disagree with? I absolutely know that white Jesus has been a tool of oppression. I talk about it all the time. White Jesus has been a tool of oppression throughout American history and world history, for that matter. But if white people feel the need to worship a white Republican, gun-toting, healing-denying, because he doesn't want you to have health care Jesus, that's their prerogative. So long as they don't bother me as I preach about the black Jesus who healed the sick when they were sick, even when they didn't have money, the black Jesus who chased the capitalists out of the temple, the black socialist liberation Jesus who ain't putting up with their capitalist bullshit. Amen? Amen.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. At this point in every single episode, I like to take a minute to thank the people who make the show possible, our patrons. No matter how many patrons we get, we will always celebrate them. So very special welcome to Althea M. Palmer. Thank you for becoming a patron. And last but certainly not least, a very special welcome to, wait a minute, Senator Nina Turner. Turn up for Nina Turner being a patron of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Everybody just bop your head. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get twice the content, uncut, unfiltered interviews, and none of the commercial interruptions like you'll get right here.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yeah. All right. All right, let's wrap it up for the public show. Again, as always, you can get full access to the patron party that we have at least once a month, possibly twice a month. Let me close out with this for the public show. I put so much emphasis on bad faith actors because that is really that's our enemy. That's what we're fighting against. It is the bad faith actors in either party, any political ideology. You have people who are there who never intended to engage in good faith from the beginning. And that tells you everything that you need to know. There are people who are surrounding us who claim to have our same political ideology, who would do as much damage to us as any conservative or any libertarian or someone who hates our political ideology. We are surrounded by people who never, when they sat down at the table to negotiate with us, they never intended to do right by you in the first place. And we cannot move forward so long as the people who are in power are people who would just as soon gut us as they would ever try to help us. And we find that no matter where we go, we're going to find that everywhere. And that's because we live in a system that incentivizes greed, that incentivizes taking advantage of other people, exploiting other people. That is the nature of our system. And so people of bad faith have always fomented to the top because there's no one they're not willing to step on in order to get to the top. And we have that both in progressive circles, socialist circles, communist circles. I don't care how far left you go. There are people who engage in bad faith who are simply there for their own self-aggrandizement and their own political and economic power. And so I put so much emphasis on that because that is where we have to cut to the root. That's the core of the matter. Because I would much rather sit down across the table with someone who disagrees with my economic policies, but agrees with something as simple as truth, that up is up and down is down. But if we can't find people who will acknowledge that there is a baseline of truth, then all of this is a lost cause. Patrons, stay tuned. Everyone else, I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.